we have a responsibility for that. And we have a responsibility for making sure that they understand that if they or we focus too much on what others are doing, rather than on the improvements that we're trying to make for ourselves, then we run the risk that we're only going to keep comparing ourselves to others rather than improving ourselves. And in that sense, we also can run the risk that we're never good enough. And then when you do that, that can lead to doubt and to fear and to anxiety. And it can take all that joy out of what we're trying to do. And what we do and what we achieve is important. But I've always believed, and I always tell the kids this too when we're doing an honor group, that's all important. But what's equally important, or maybe sometimes more important, is what we've done and learned through our journey to reach that goal.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Everything Band, a podcast that features conversations with composers, conductors, and performers of music for winds and percussion. My name is Mark Connor. I'm a composer and educator, and each week I have the good fortune to speak with and share the stories and wisdom of musicians and leaders in the band community. Are you planning to travel with your group sometime soon? If so, please consider my sponsor, Kaleidoscope Adventures, a full-service tour company specializing in student group travel. With a former educator as its CEO, Kaleidoscope Adventures is dedicated to changing student lives through travel, and they offer high-quality service and an attention to detail that comes from more than 25 years of student travel experience. Trust Kaleidoscope's outstanding staff to focus on your group's one-of-a-kind adventure so that you can focus on everything else. The Everything Band podcast is a proud member of the Music Teachers Development Podcast Network. The Muted Network provides support in the form of audio-on-demand programming designed by and for music educators. You can find more information about our network at mutedpodcasts.com. Before we begin, I'd like to thank Jake Walker and Colin Peters for their contributions to the show, and especially to all of you who are listening. I appreciate your time and hope that you are finding value from these interviews. I rely on word of mouth and social media to bring the show to new listeners. If you think you know one or two people who might find these interviews useful, please let them know about it. You can also help by following me and sharing posts on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Remember, help your students live up to the best that is in them through music. And now on to my next guest, Virginia Allen. Hi, Virginia. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, Mark?
I'm well. Now, how do you want to be called during this interview?
Why don't we just, Virginia or Jenny is fine. My nickname is Jenny.
Okay, perfect. So can you introduce yourself for the listeners and tell them who you are and why you might be on the Everything Band podcast?
Well, I think something that a lot of people don't know about me is that I am a third-generation band director. And I've had a very wonderful career in band. I was in the Army for 20 years as a band officer, and then I moved into higher education, and I've been associated with Juilliard for about 20 years, I guess. There was a period that I was not there, but I still continue to teach a course there now, so I've been very, very lucky with my career. But to go back to the third generation, I'd like to talk a little bit about that because this started in Texas. My father is from a family of 11 children, and his father was a self-taught music educator. And he ended up teaching school bands and teaching students in the area. He also conducted professional bands. In those days, they had the circus bands and the railroad bands. And so all the kids in the family played an instrument. So I'm very proud of that heritage. And then my father started in the military in the Coast Guard right at the end of World War II. He had some older brothers who were serving in the Army in World War II. And when the war was over and his enlistment was up, he went back to Texas. And one of his brothers who'd been in the military band was assigned to the Army Ground Forces Band, which is now the U.S. Army Field Band. And he recruited my father to be a trumpet player with that band. So that started my father's Army career. And my father ended up progressing up through enlisted, warrant officer, and officer rank. And he was the 5th leader and commander of the Army Band in Washington, D.C. So Colonel Eugene Allen. Yeah. And he had 45 years of military service between the few years in the Coast Guard and then all of his assignments and duty in the Army.
So how about you? How did you get started in music? Obviously, you come from a musical family, but when was that moment when you said, okay, I'm going to do this and follow in the footsteps?
I remember being really little, and my dad had vibes at home. I mean, I was maybe 3 or 4 years old. I remember playing Mary Had a Little Lamb on the vibe. But it was my music education really started when we moved to West Point. My father was the executive officer and associate conductor of the West Point Band. And he brought home a little field organ. And I don't know if you've ever seen those before, but they actually fold up to like a big suitcase. And chaplains, they could take those out into the field when the Army was out in the field, and they would use those for chapel services. Well, it's not, I forget how many octaves it is, but you actually have to pump the pedals to make the organ work. So my father showed me how to create triads, and he showed me a fake book. And by that time, I'd already been reading music because we always sang in church choirs. And that was my start to figuring out, how to improvise and do things at piano. Because I was 10 years old, I was in the 5th grade, and we had music in our elementary school at West Point. So I decided to play trumpet, which was my father's instrument, and that might have been because he played it, and I wanted to do what he did. And I can't even remember if I used his instrument. I think I probably used the school instrument. So I played trumpet for 2 years, and then the band director there in the elementary school needed a horn player, and he asked if I would switch to that. So I did for 1 year. And then we moved to Virginia Beach. I switched back to trumpet and then was thinking about horn. My dad said, you got to stick with one or the other. You're going to ruin your embouchure. So I stuck with trumpet or with French horn after that.
We often talk about that switching as kids. That's a topic that comes up. Many directors, many successful professional musicians switched at some point. I think sometimes maybe there's a reluctance to do that with kids, or maybe there's an overeagerness to do that with kids. I don't know if there's any lesson I can impart, because it's really situation to situation with kids. But there's no doubt that director looked at you and said, oh, she's talented. Let's put her on the horn.
Well, I think one of the things, to be honest with you, one of the reasons that I was maybe eager to go to something else was that I was the only girl in the trumpet section. And so, and I would get the comment, the rose amongst all the thorns. But, it kind of made me stand out. I liked horn. I was the only horn in this little elementary band. But also, I think one of the reasons I switched back to trumpet was because it was so cumbersome carrying the horn around. I remember having to climb up on the bus with it and everything, and the trumpet was a lot smaller, but there was just something, when I had the opportunity to do horn again, I know everybody says this, but it's something about the sound of the horn. It's just so wonderful. Yeah. And I'm really glad that was my instrument.
Well, let's talk about the progression from high school on to university, because I know that you were in the military, and I'd like to hear sort of how you got from horn player in Virginia Beach to, military band musician and then conductor.
Well, first I want to add a little bit about the high school experience, if I can, because I think this is important for people to know about too. When we moved from West Point, I would have been going into the 8th grade. And when we moved down to Virginia Beach, 8th grade was part of high school. So I'm this 13-year-old in with kids who are 17, 18 years old. And it was probably the toughest year of school for me. And personally, just a very tough, challenging year trying to figure out where I fit in and everything. And I was doing trumpet at that time. And then the next year switched to horn. But I will say that it was band that saved me, because I felt things just were not clicking. I wasn't doing well academically, not as well as I had hoped to. And everything it was like a switch was flipped the 9th grade. Everything just seemed to be so much different. And I know that a lot of it was because of band and being able to do something there. And what the band director did, he decided to split the band into 2 bands. So he had one that was a little less proficient. And then he had the top band, which ended up being a very smaller ensemble too. And so because I was switching back to horn again, he put me into the lower band, but then he realized he needed me also in the upper band. So I ended up playing in both. And what that also did was it gave me not only confidence as a player, but also as a person. So that was very, very helpful in there too.
I didn't play in middle school, but in high school, I rejoined the band program, and that did save me. That was I was completely lost until that. And I think that's a really common story among musicians, is that either some trauma that band helped them, or that was their people, or that's where they found their identity. I think that's part of the draw of music. And I don't know if you can speak to that, but I imagine that continued on throughout your career. I imagine that's even true in the military bands.
Oh, it is. Band people are a community. And I found that, especially in high school, and then when we moved up to the DC area, to Northern Virginia, I found that to be the same way there, that we were really part of a community. And as I look back on it, and when I go to reunions and things, I realized that most of the people I knew and that I hung out with were in band. Now, we all ended up playing sports in my family too. We all gravitated towards basketball, so we did that. But my most common contacts are with people in band. And of course, some of that was, I have, let's see, 2 sisters and a brother. 4 of us were pretty close in age. There's 7 kids in our family altogether, but 4 of us that were close in age. And so my father would have us on Sunday afternoons. When I was in high school, we would get together and play music. We'd start down in the basement and we'd do some of his arrangements, maybe chorales or something. And then we'd switch around some on the instruments. I'd be on French horn for the more classical stuff, and then I'd move to the piano for Dixieland and jazz things. So that, continued a sense of community in that. But it's always, it's everybody wants to belong to something, and music gives us that opportunity to do that. And especially if we're in band or orchestra or chorus, and band was it for me. And I grew up, with my father seeing what he did and being around the people that he worked with and everything. I always saw that community within those organizations.
So you mentioned athletics. I also played basketball in high school.
Oh,
I have
cool.
a very funny story about a coach who told me I shouldn't go on a band trip because there was a basketball practice. And many years later, I sort of brought that up to him and said, look at my profession now.
Yeah.
But anyway, I say that to ask, so you also mentioned that you were involved in athletics. Were there any conflicts?
Yes, and I was just going to say about that. Yeah, there were, because there could be a rehearsal, a band rehearsal, and a practice going on. And I still know our band director very well. In fact, my band director, high school band director, is Zool Bailey, who is the father of the cellist, Zool Bailey. Yeah, and the high school coach, Cynthia Wild, they would help us work things out. Teachers sometimes can be very strict about those conflicts and can be very territorial with each other. But I have to say that Zool and Cynthia were great in helping us to work those things out.
All right. So where'd you go to undergrad?
Well, I started at East Carolina, and I was not in music. I played in band that whole first year. But I was going to go into physical therapy, and that was one of the few schools that had a physical therapy program. I enjoyed the sciences, but to be honest with you, there were not a lot of women doctors or women scientists, so it was like, I'm not sure that I'm smart enough to do this. And I actually, in my first quarter, did really well in chemistry and loved it. So I switched to become a chemistry major and thinking that, I might go into medicine, but still feeling this really strong pull of music. And after the first year at East Carolina, for the next year, they were raising the out-of-state tuition 6 times the amount that I was paying. And my parents said, you need to come home to Virginia. So I was accepted to William and Mary, but they didn't have dorm space. So the dean talked to my mother, and he said, have her go someplace close to home for a semester, and then she can come down to William and Mary in the spring semester. So I decided to go to George Mason, which at that time was a commuter school, very, very small school, and they had a small music program. So I was going there, and I was going to be a chemistry major, and walked past the music department. And I thought, well, of course I'm going to play in band or do something. And this is how strong that pull still was. I ended up doing an audition on piano. I hadn't played much horn over the summer, but I thought, well, let's see how I do. And I auditioned on piano and was accepted as a music major. And I think part of that too was that, I think because I was undecided about whether or not I wanted to do what my dad did, and feeling the pressure of that. And honestly, there's always pressure in a situation like that. And so and he was actually in Hawaii doing a gig with the Herald Trumpets from the Army Band. So when he came back, I said, well, I'm a music major. So it was something that I did on my own, and a decision that I was able to make on my own too. So I was at George Mason's for a full year. And then I found out, I met some folks from Catholic University in Washington, D.C., and found out they were looking for horn players and they were offering scholarships. So I went and auditioned, and I got a horn scholarship to play horn in the wind ensemble. And I don't know if you know the name Robert Garofalo. He and Frank Battisti wrote the book on score analysis.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. And he was my advisor, and he was the director of the wind ensemble. So a very important person in my development. And so I did the degree in music education and took a conducting class with him. He was my supervisor for my student teaching. And then when I finished, after student teaching, I did out where my folks lived in Northern Virginia, out in Woodbridge, Virginia. And I did middle school, which was not the greatest experience. I liked the kids and everything, but in that school, it just, for several reasons, just was not the greatest experience for me. And I'm glad that I did high school after that. I ended up student teaching at my rival high school. But this was in the town where I'd gone to high school, and it was the best experience ever. And again, it was like, well, there sure aren't a lot of women doing what I did. I had never been under the baton of a woman conductor. I didn't think that there would be, if there was anything, it would be as an assistant at the high school. So I ended up staying on to get my master's in horn. And at the end, as I was finishing that up, then I started thinking about the Army.
Hey there. My name is Dr. Garrett Hope. I am a composer, coach, podcaster, and speaker. I've been focused on building my music business since 2014 and helping others build theirs since 2015. I want to tell you about the second annual Ultimate Music Business Summit we are organizing. It'll take place early January of 2022. There will be dozens of presentations with highly actionable content, all of it available to you so you can start your business, grow your business, and ultimately make more money. Because here's the deal. Unless you earn all of your income from an employer, you are a self-employed small business owner. And if you want to do more than survive, if you want to grow your audience, or if you want to impact more people, you have to think and act like a business owner. And that means this summit is for you. This summit will give you real-world, not theoretical, strategies you can implement immediately. You don't need to be stuck with fear or living in your failures. I promise you, with all the teachers lined up, you will get something you've never thought of before. Even though building a business is hard, no one is promising it's easy. It is possible. You just need the right tools and strategies. Tickets for this virtual event will go on sale soon. To be the first in line and to get more information about the summit, presenters, and more, go to musicsummit.biz. That's musicsummit.biz and add your email to the list.
So I was going to ask, as I listen to your story, and you've mentioned it a couple times, you talked about it with the sciences and, when you were a student and, women in the hard sciences and women as high school band directors. Now, interestingly, and I've said this many times on the show, aside from some student teachers and a few like guest conductors, things like that. I've never played an ensemble with a woman conductor.
Yeah.
And I'm 50 years old and I've been a musician my entire life. It's extraordinary to me that has happened to me. Now, I've been pretty naive about these things for most of my life, and I never really thought about it in those terms until the past decade. But I know that was a hard time as far as being a female band director at the high school level. Do you want to talk about that a little bit and kind of set up maybe something we're going to talk about later?
Specifically being a female band director or just opportunities for women in general. And I think it's important to know that first of all, this goes back to the culture of that time. I mean, we're talking early 70s. Well, I graduated from high school in 71. And so I was finishing up my bachelor's, I guess it was 75, and then my master's in 76. And by that time, women they started integrating women into military bands. So I saw a little bit of that. But it was this culture, I mean, you were expected to get married. You weren't necessarily expected to have a career with anything. And I didn't have any women role models with that. Now, I will say, though, that as I look back on the men who mentored me, they never doubted that I could do whatever I wanted to do. So it goes back to my high school band directors, especially Zool Bailey, because I knew him better. But, I was in leadership positions there. I remember he allowed me one time to arrange for the stage band. It just things that made me feel that there was nothing in the way of me doing what I wanted to do. And then when I was in college, it was the same thing with Bob Garofalo. There was nothing that should be an impediment to me. And even in student teaching, especially at the high school, the director that I worked with was very encouraging as well.
Did you end up teaching high school?
I did not, no, because I went into the Army directly after I got my master's.
Ah, okay. So you student taught, got your master's, and then went to the Army.
Yeah.
Did you get your master's at George Mason or somewhere else?
No, I stayed at Catholic and got my master's in performance on horn.
Okay. All right. Excellent. Yeah. And so, it's interesting that you're talking about this because I've been watching this Apple TV show For All Mankind. Do you know this show?
I do not.
It's kind of like an alternate history show. It starts off with the Russians beat us to the moon.
Okay.
And it completely changes the course of NASA and history, and women are integrated into NASA more quickly. And it's just fascinating to watch kind of like a different what if history play out where a lot of the breakthroughs and a lot of the advancements we've seen happened earlier because they were forced by the Cold War.
Yeah.
It was fascinating because it's on my mind because I just finished watching the second season. So,
Well, it's interesting because my dad had a lot of sisters, and some were school teachers. One taught at the university level. So and they were very strong women, and he had a lot of brothers too. But I think, and his mother was a very strong person. She had been a school teacher and also played clarinet. So I think that, he had a respect for what women could do. And it's interesting because I don't know, things just happened to be aligned for me. Women were starting to be integrated. And my father was in a position, by that time, he was the executive officer of the Army Band in Washington. And so he played an important part in a smooth integration of women into their band. And he was very proud of what they did. And I think, again, that, when he saw these things happening, because he's in the Army, there were a lot of things that were close to women in the Army in general, in the military in general. So I think that, again, the stars were just kind of aligned for me.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting.
And I wasn't, even when I went into the Army, I didn't specifically go in to be a band director. I was finishing up my master's, and I thought, okay, so I don't even really want to go out and apply for a teaching job because I just felt that the opportunities would be too limited. And I thought about the military, and I thought, and I'd been playing so much in the practice room so much that I felt I wanted to get out and do other things and see other things. I thought, what if I go into the Army for 3 years as an admin officer? I can be assigned in Germany. I can play horn on the side. That's what I was thinking of doing. But at the back of my head, I was also thinking, and I had other people telling me, well, you could be, they had one other woman who was in the band program as an officer. And they were saying, well, you could be, one also, and you could be, maybe the first woman to do this and do that. I will say that's enticing,
absolutely.
Think about it on the professional level. And so I did. When I was going through my training, I was in the last class of women to receive a direct commission, because by that time women were at West Point, women were coming through Officer Candidate School and then ROTC, so they no longer needed this direct commission program. And it was while I was in there that I made arrangements to, after that training, to stay with the band there at Fort McClellan, Alabama, and prepare to do my audition at the School of Music. And so I went on and auditioned to be a band officer.
And so let's talk about that story, because you mentioned that you had the opportunity to be the first.
It was interesting because, let's see, women came into I know the Army band. I think it was 1973 when the first woman came into the Army band. And maybe that was the year that they were integrating, because there used to be an all-female Army band, the WAC band, Women's Army Corps Band. In fact, I saw them when I was in high school down in Virginia Beach. So I remember the women in the band, but it didn't even impact me that it was a woman conducting, because it was just all women up there. But they were integrated as well. So they became the 14th Army Band at Fort McClellan. But so that was 1976. Women were just beginning to be allowed into West Point, and one of my youngest sister ended up going to West Point. So my dad was really kind of, as all this happened, and policies change, and you may not agree with everything, or you may be skeptical about how it's going to work. But I will say that my dad I don't know really what he thought, but he was the kind of person, if this is what we have to do, I'm going to do everything I can to make it work well. And one of the interesting things that he told me years later was that there was such a benefit that he didn't realize at first that would come of this. And there were women, particularly in the ceremonial band. And this is what I have faced through my career, and I know other women do too, is that we have to do better to be able to prove ourselves with men, and with not just men, but also administrators and for school teachers, with parents and everything. You have to do better. You have to have a higher standard, or aim for a higher standard. My dad said that in the ceremonial band, there were these women just, trying to they were really straight with their uniform and everything sounded good with their playing. And all of a sudden the guys around them are going, oh my goodness, I guess I better step this up a little bit. And they started really becoming more serious.
So now you did mention that you wanted to achieve these things and these goals. So tell me about your progression in the Army. When did you start out as a conductor, or did you start out as a musician? How did that progress?
Yeah, because I was an officer, what I did was audition for the Army Band Officer Program. So I became a band officer, and the program was such that there were, I forget exactly how many officers, but I think during my career it was anywhere between 24 and 28 commissioned officers. So there may have been, many more bands, and we had active National Guard and Reserve bands, but most of them were commanded and conducted by warrant officers, and then the commissioned officers, and they distinguished between warrant and commissioned men. But the commissioned officers were assigned to the special bands, West Point, the Army Band, the Field Band, and then they had major command bands in Atlanta, Germany, and over at Fort Monroe, which is over near Hampton Roads, Newport News area. And then there were the School of Music is a place that we could be assigned to, and then there were also some staff offices. So there were very few places that we could be assigned, and so you would think that would be kind of predictable, but it was always sort of a domino game. When somebody moved, then it caused several other moves a lot of times, just the way things work. So there was a kind of progression that you could expect, but it never completely worked out the way that you expected. And I think that's one of the things, you had to be flexible with that. You really had to not expect that you were going to get this next assignment or that assignment, just the way, the timing of assignments worked out and everything.
So what was your first assignment?
My first assignment was to the School of Music, and the commandant of the Army element wanted new officers to come there so that he could place us in a couple of different jobs, rotate us through some things that would give us experience before we went out to a staff job or to a band. So I was what they called the adjutant. I was the administrative officer for the Army element for a while. Then for a year, I was the company commander of the Army element. And that meant all the students that were there, as well as everyone who was on staff there. And command is always a great job. And I learned so much doing that. And then the remainder of the time I was there, I was the training officer. And of course, it's the Navy School of Music. So I was working with people in the Navy side and also the Marine side. So learned a lot about things there.
When did you get your first ensemble in the Army?
Yeah, that was after I was at the School of Music. And I can't even remember exactly what year that was. Maybe it was 79. And that was in Atlanta at Fort McPherson. And you'll like this. Fort McPherson closed several years ago, and it is now Tyler Perry Studios. So that was a major command band, and I think that they were supposed to have a captain in there. Again, we've got each assignment has a rank assigned to it, but sometimes somebody who's in a lower rank or a higher rank might be assigned there. Well, I was still only a lieutenant, and I was assigned to that band. And at that time, I think we had 56 people. It was on the larger side then. And I was the only conductor. I was the only commissioned officer there. So it was me and all of the enlisted people. Now, some of them, like the enlisted band leader and some of the other senior NCOs, could conduct too. But primarily, I did all the concerts and most of the ceremonies and other things too.
So 2 questions there. Did that have a marching component? Did you have a drum major?
Oh yeah, we had a marching component. Every military band does.
Yeah, I know. Silly question. So, but there's a leadership structure underneath that officer to kind of.
Yeah. And it was we had 2 different drum majors there. Everybody always has a couple so that you can kind of rotate that. But we had a retirement parade every month at Fort McPherson, and then we did parades in Atlanta and around Atlanta.
In addition to concert band music as well, or just
we did concerts, and there were certain ones like we used to do a 4th of July concert at the base of Stone Mountain, which was a great concert. We did 1812, and they'd bring the cannons over and everything. And I started a winter concert series in the old Post Theater that we had there, so that it gave an opportunity that we still would be rehearsing for something. And it was just a way to kind of have a little bit more structure to what we were doing and to try to increase the excellence as we went along.
Did you also, I know a lot of the military bands now are more than just bands. They have a jazz component, a rock component, strings. There's, when you're the band, it's more about being servicing the whole musical community. Was that part of what you did too?
We had a jazz band, we had a Dixieland band, we had, we did a multimedia show, and this is something that our band did, and they actually had one before I was assigned there, and as I was assigned, or maybe it was as I was transitioning in, they updated that multimedia show. So we had, it's a screen with video going on and slides, but we had singers with it too, and it was it was like conducting a movie. You had to be in time with what was going on the screen.
Wow.
It was a lot of fun to do that. And it's something that not only sold our command, but sold the Army. And so we would take that around the country doing that.
Absolutely. The military bands, that's the primary mission, isn't it?
Well, it is. And, and I learned this. I heard this even much more when I was with the Army Field Band, but we would go out to places where we were the only military that they ever met. And that was the impression, you want to be able to make that impression, and you can do that in such a positive way through music.
Okay, so that first band, you are one of the first women officers in the Army.
There was a woman officer when I came in, but she only did 3 years, and then she ended up getting out of the Army. And she did not go, she had been a staff officer, but had not been assigned to a band. So when I went to this band in Atlanta, I was the first woman to conduct an active duty band integrated with men and women.
That's serious business.
I think there was a woman who was warrant officer with the National Guard band and maybe with the reserve band, but I knew that, but I didn't know the women. I hadn't seen them conduct. So
I like the way you're so matter of fact about it. It's like, I just did it. Now, when we look back,
but you just do it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. And that's true that's good advice for anybody in any situation.
Well, and I forget my age. Maybe I was 26 years old then. I was conducting professionals.
How was that? Were you intimidated?
No, I loved it. I love being able to work with them, and you have to remember their talent and remember to ask for their input on some things and to include them. But it was a wonderful opportunity to be able to do things. I mean, we did things, some regular marches and patriotic stuff, but when we did concerts, it was just wonderful being able to work with them.
Which was the top band that you conducted?
I was with the Army Field Band. So I started with them as the term for it was tour director. So I supervised the office that planned and implemented all the tours. And it was concert band and soldiers chorus that usually traveled together. And then we had a rock group, and then we also had the jazz group. So we were going in different directions all around the country. And then I was the interim director for the soldiers chorus for a spring tour. And then, they used to do 6-week tours. And that year we always did a summer tour, which is about 10 days long. And then we also had a trip to Europe that year because it was the 40th anniversary of D-Day. So I forget, it was so much time. There were very few days that we had off from the beginning of that spring tour until the end of the fall tour. So 6 weeks, then 10 days, then 16 days. Then we did get a 2-week holiday, and then we were back to another 6-week tour.
Just to finish the story of your Army, I also note that you were the Army Staff Bands Officer.
I managed plans and policies for Army bands worldwide. And I was stationed in Alexandria, but a lot of the work took place over in the Pentagon. And this was one of the principles that my father taught me. Be prepared to educate people over and over and over again. And I had to do that a lot in this job with people, whether they were in the Army or someplace else. Budget people who could help us, people who could help us save bands. And one of the first things I did going into that job, first of all, they had done away with that office at one point. And then they were thinking about reopening it. And I volunteered to go there because I felt very strongly that we needed that advocacy at the top level of the Army. And one of the first things that I had to do was do an action to save 5 bands from being deactivated. And we were successful with that. So it was very, very rewarding in that sense. And I'd had one assignment at the Pentagon earlier in my career as a public affairs officer. So I had gotten to know where to go to in the Pentagon and learning a little bit about how to get things done.
So you mentioned that you were in charge of policies. What would that entail for my listeners who are kind of curious about that?
Oh gosh, it's been so long.
That's okay.
I've thought about that. Well, the policies could be this thing about working with to make sure that the bands are not deactivated. It was making sure that we had the right structure within the bands. A couple of other things with regarding officers. They used to, for those who came in through officer candidate school, they were kind of unidentified once we got them into the Army. But we helped to make sure that they were going to be able to get through their training and get into the Army band program. We sometimes would have 2 colonel positions and one be vacant, and we would have people go before promotion, and they're competing with all the other Army officers in the branch that we were in. And if somebody didn't get picked up, we still had that opening. That's like, a big band director position somewhere and not being able to get the right person in there. I mean, somebody may be filling it, but they may not have the rank that they should have. And we were able to identify that and really protect those. Those were the kinds of policies that I was working with.
Well, Virginia, I first of all, I appreciate your service and I think it's remarkable what you accomplished as a pioneer in the Army, but that's not the end of your career. That's what the halfway point maybe, or whatever, wherever we are at this point. So let's talk about your post-Army career. You I know you've been involved at Juilliard. And so I'm wondering if maybe you want to talk us through that transition from the military back to the civilian.
Sure. Well, I made the unusual decision for some people that I decided I was going to retire at 20 years. And usually people will stay in longer, and they'll stay in, and try to get that next promotion. And for me, for a number of reasons, and some of it was that I had been around the Army all my life. And I always wondered, what else is out there? What else could I be doing? What else could I do to have maybe a little bit more normal life too? And so I originally thought that I would go on and get a DMA, and I auditioned at several places and was accepted. And for a couple summers, I also did a orchestral conducting workshop up in Canada with Otto Werner Mueller, who taught at Juilliard and at Curtis. And I loved the way he taught. I loved his conducting. And so as I'm also out doing these auditions and thinking about the DMA, I found out that they had an internship program at Juilliard. And if I were to do this particular internship in orchestral activities, I would be managing his orchestra that his students would conduct. I'd have an opportunity to see all these other guest conductors come in. And it was I just imagined that it could be an experience that I could never have again, and one I could never have imagined. And so I was accepted for that and ended up deferring the schools if I still wanted to go on and get my DMA. So went to New York thinking I'd only be there for 9 months or a year, and ended up loving it so much that I stayed there for 6 years and really began what I considered to be independent studies.
And so do you want to talk about your husband?
Yeah, Otto Werner Mueller. I had so much respect for him as a musician and as a person too. His late wife had a stroke 14 years before she passed away. So not only was he teaching at 2 conservatories, but he was taking care of her. He was her only caregiver. So we all admired what he did, but I so loved his conducting and his teaching, and we became good colleagues. He began to ask me, he did his audition at Juilliard was 3 days long. At Curtis, it was 2 days long, but it was a very, very stringent process. And the first part of that was dictation and ear training and everything. And so he started to have me do that part of his exam for him during the audition. And then recommended me to teach the conducting to non-conducting majors at Juilliard. So he was a wonderful colleague, a mentor. And then when his wife passed away, we became much closer and had an opportunity also to move part-time to Philadelphia. So we were living in Philadelphia, New York for the first year or two that we were married. And then he was based completely in Philadelphia after that.
Right. And so you've been involved with several schools in Philadelphia, Curtis and the University of the Arts. And I see that.
Right. Yeah.
So what has your career looked like beyond this? I mean, what do you do now? What are sort of your main activity?
Yeah, my main activity now, what I've been doing, and I'm glad you brought this up because I did want to mention this a little bit. My husband, one of the marks of his teaching and of his conducting was that he very thoroughly studied and marked his scores and his parts. It was just phenomenal how he did that. And I have his entire collection of music. So it's close to 1,000 scores and then close to 500 sets of orchestra parts. And then there is other memorabilia, there are recordings and just a lot of information there. But what I am doing is trying to, I'm maintaining the collection, but trying to make it available in some way to other people. But I'm also digitizing his recordings, any videos that I can find. And I do have a website for him, but I want to expand on that so that people can learn more about his teaching and more about him. He just has a fascinating background as well. And then I've been interviewing people too, trying to figure out, what was it that made him so good and what drove him to do what he did.
Yeah, I mean, this is what we'd all like to know, right? About master teachers and master musicians is the secret sauce is what I call it.
Well, and that's why I'm so excited about the course that I teach. It's one that I developed for Juilliard, and it's teaching the art of teaching in the music studio. So it's studio pedagogy, but it's also learning about the business of running a studio. But I'm just fascinated, and part of what they have to do is observe master teachers and then write about it. And every band conductor, and I love it when band directors say, "I'm a teacher." And you are. And at the college level, they're teaching the conductors, but they're also teaching every one of the musicians that sit in their ensembles. And that has such a wide reach. But it's just learning the different styles and the different things that teachers do is just fascinating to me.
So how about I know you have some arrangements and some publications. How about that? How about your writing?
Yeah, that actually started, I had composed one march for women. At that time, it was Women Band Directors International. No, it is now WBDI. At that time, it was Women Band Directors National Association. And they had a conference in Washington, D.C., and I helped to organize that and we were able to get some guest conductors with the Army Band, too. My father was very gracious about that. And so I thought it would be a great opportunity to do a march for the organization that did that. And then really just didn't have time to write after that. But when I got to Juilliard, I guess it actually started with someone, a trombone player who I knew, said, "Here's this piece which really needs to be arranged for wind ensemble. Why don't you do it?" And I mentioned it to somebody at the Army Band because they have a trombone workshop, and they go, "Okay, it's programmed." And I'd never transcribed anything before.
I see you have a lot of transcriptions of Eric Owazen's work.
Yeah. I love his music. And so it's been great to be able to transcribe his things from orchestra over to wind ensemble. But what I found, even though I didn't have formal training in it, I did do some lessons with a friend of mine who helped me with orchestration. But I found that my experience in front of an ensemble helped so much. I knew those sounds.
So I only know one trombone player at Juilliard. Is that who I'm thinking of?
No, it was actually somebody with the Metropolitan Opera.
Oh, okay. But
Joe Alessi has been important in my career and in my life too, because one of the things as an intern, I knew what a great musician he was, and I knew that he ran a low brass class, and so here I am, this intern, but I said, "Joe, could I come sit in on your class?" He said, "Yeah," and so I did that every week, and I learned so much, and then we ended up forming establishing a trombone choir there. And so that gave me, I had a group that I could write for too, which was really nice.
You're doing some advocacy for women conductors, and you mentioned WBDI, and we know about your history as the first, female to conduct an Army band, as far as an officer, a regular Army band. So what are you doing now as far as advocacy for women on the podium?
There's nothing that I'm actively doing now. I mean, if somebody needs some mentoring, then I'll help with that. During the pandemic, Jenny and Lori Schwartz-Reichel and Laura Johnson and I established a group called Women Banding Together. And we were trying to do something once a month through Zoom. And then I had some other things that were put on my plate, so I had to step away from that. And I'm not sure what they're doing with that now. But it was a great opportunity to bring women together to talk about some different issues, or just to, everybody was doing just the idea during the pandemic to have that chance to have a happy hour and discuss whatever you wanted to.
Is there any advice for young conductors that you would give?
Yeah, I thought about that, about the lessons that I learned and advice that I might give. And I was very lucky that I had my father as a mentor. And as I look back on his life, he passed away last December, by the way. And I had to put together some remarks for a reception after his funeral in June at Arlington National Cemetery. And so it really gave me a chance to think about, because I was always amazed at how did he know so much? And how did he always know what to do? And those years and years of experience, but it was also these principles that he lived by. And at some point in my career, I started writing them down, handwriting them. And I came across, I fortunately scanned that in somewhere. And there are more than 20 of them in there, but I was able to mention a few of those when I talked about him. And I think those are really important. And those are things that I learned through him. And the first thing we kind of talked about before, but do the best job that you're in, rather than wasting time wishing for what you don't have. And that if you could be in the worst job, or, in the Army in particular, we rotated between band jobs and staff jobs. Nobody wanted to do the staff job because you didn't have time to conduct, you didn't have a band. And my philosophy was always go in there and do the best you can, because you're also representing people and the other bands that are out there. And you don't worry about what's going to happen next, because if you do well, people are going to notice you, and they're going to want to be able to move you on to a position of more where you can share your experience there. And so I have always believed in that philosophy.
Do you have others that you'd like to share, or could you share the list with my listeners? Could I post it, or?
I'll take a look. I need to revise some of the things on there. And again, it's a handwritten list at this point. One of the other things he mentioned was always take care of the behind the scenes people. And for him, it was, the people who did the setup, the audio guys. If they were going into a concert hall that was someplace else, always making sure that, you took care of the people there. Eventually, while my father was commander of the Army band, they were able to move into quarters at Fort Myer, right across the street from the band building. And that also gave them the opportunity to entertain when they had guest conductors and guest performers. And he always had the back door open and had a refrigerator back there. But any of the stage crew could come and stop by afterwards. Because he had done that. He worked on driving a truck and as a stage crew with the field band. So he knew how important it was to take care of the people behind the scenes and make them feel valued.
Oh, absolutely.
If we have time, I'll share one other thing from my father that I learned from him. And this was actually when I was getting ready to do my master's recital when I was still at Catholic. He taught me how to bow. And it's very simple. You just bend over and look at your feet. And every time I bow, I'm thinking of my dad. And as I'm looking at my shoes, I think, look at your feet. I mean, literally. that his voice is in my head telling me that.
Hey there, everyone. My name is Ann Molesky, and I'm the host of the Anna Krusik Podcast, another podcast in the Muted Network. I've helped teacher musicians just like you get more intentional in their classrooms through my trainings, curriculum, and teacher talk. Because the truth is, teaching music is hard. You have a bunch of kids to teach and not a lot of free time to figure out how. Feeling overwhelmed and frustrated is totally normal. But here's the good news. It only takes a few simple steps to flip the script. It may be simple, but it's definitely not easy unless you have the right toolkit. So let's start tuning and transforming your music teacher life right now. Join me on Mondays for tips, tricks, and community conversations about how to make the general music classroom more intentional and impactful for both you and your students. We'll talk about the actual actionable steps you need to find the purpose, follow a sequence, and choose joy in your classroom each and every day. I'll see you there.
So, Virginia, at the end of every interview, I ask a series of questions of all my guests. I call it my enlightened round. And I know you and I have hinted at it a couple times already here, so we should probably get into this because I know you have some thoughts. My first question definitely gets some people on some people's nerves here, but it's where do you draw the line between healthy and unhealthy competition in music?
I think that healthy competition is something that makes us better musicians and better human beings. I think that it should give us a sense of accomplishment when we reach a standard that we want to achieve, either individually or as part of a group or as a team. And it should result in something that's going to bring us joy.
So the second question vexes music teachers. You know, there's a joke in the music, the band community that, you know, you're the first car in the lot in the morning and the last car out in the evening. But I think it's symptomatic of all musicians and conductors and anyone who does music, you know, full time. How have you found a work-life balance between your career and your life?
Yeah, I'm not sure that I have a complete balance, but I definitely have other things that I like to do. But music is so much a part of me too, that if I go to a concert, if I'm listening to music, that can be very relaxing for me too. But I used to run, and I didn't want to lose my knee. So I walk now, and I'm lucky in Philadelphia. I can walk along the Schuylkill Banks, which is beautiful. I mean, going miles and miles. So that's wonderful. I love watching movies. That's a real escape for me. I love independent and foreign films. I love film noir. And then I also enjoy traveling. So, and I am so eager to get back to that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, music is a vocation, but it's also a calling for most musicians. I don't know too many musicians who, you know, don't have some kind of calling to this field. You know, and so it's always that kind of balance because we are musicians. My wife's a cellist. We talk about music all the time. It's like it's omnipresent in my life, but I don't feel unbalanced by that. I only feel unbalanced when I'm not spending the time with the people I love enough.
Well, you know, and what I'm thinking about now is I'm in such a fortunate position that I'm still able to teach at Juilliard. I'm still connected to faculty there, and especially now that we're back in person. And that goes back to this thing of having a community to belong to. And that's wonderful because I'm able to connect with people and we're able to do different things, whether it's talking about another project to work on or going to see a movie together or whatever. And yet I think back to like my first assignment where I did the first band where I was commanding the band and I was the only officer there. And there is this community, but I couldn't entirely be part of that.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Because of the rank. So I enjoy where I am right now.
All right, Virginia, this is the question we've all been waiting for. What are the challenges facing music education and band, and how do you think we best meet them?
Well, because I don't teach as many of the music educators who listen to the podcast, because I don't teach at that level, I'm not aware of everything. But the one thing that I am aware of, and I'm very surprised about, is that women band directors are still facing so many challenges because of their gender. Just when I thought that when I retired from the Army in 1997, I thought that we had made so many strides with equity for women in the military and within the band program and outside the military as well. So every time I think that we're moving forward, and I see so many women in different positions now, high school, college, so many women at the college level now, and they're all doing great things from elementary band up to college. But I still hear stories about a woman who has an experience that leaves her feeling marginalized or stereotyped. And I've been a part of several sessions recently where I'll speak about women's issues and about my experiences, things that are related to women band directors. And the one thing I'll say is that I am so grateful and encouraged to see so many men in those sessions, that it's not just women who are coming to that. And their presence in those sessions is really important because we need them to understand our unique issues and be our allies. And we will always have unique issues. They're never going to be completely the same. So we need the help of the men. And I'm learning that men do want to help,
which
is really great. And I'd like to just briefly maybe mention a couple of ways that men could help.
Absolutely. Please.
Okay. So the most important thing is invite women to do things. Invite women to be guest conductors for your group and for honor bands. Invite them to present clinics. Invite them to adjudicate at festivals and competitions. They're waiting for your invitation. The next thing is you include women, music by women composers in programs throughout their year. I often get a call or an email from somebody saying, "Oh, I'm programming Women of the Podium on my program of the music by all women composers." And I try to gently say, well, why don't you feature those women composers on programs throughout the year rather than always an all-female program? And then the other thing is that men can help girls in bands understand that they also can be band directors. You know, again, I grew up never seeing a woman band director, and I know other women who just never even knew that it was a possibility. And motivating girls to pursue careers as band directors starts in the band room.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. More than just sort of offering those opportunities, we have to encourage those opportunities.
And I want to clarify that, you know, the women don't feel marginalized and stereotyped. It's not exclusive to their male counterparts, but administrators do it to them, parents do it to them. If they're working at a festival and somebody's on the staff there, if they see a man and a woman, they think the man is the head director. And I read about this. Somebody had this experience where somebody made some comment, you must be the orchestra director. You don't look big enough, you know, and sturdy enough to be the band director. And the guy standing next to her said, "Oh man, you just made a stereotype there." So when men can intervene like that, that's really helpful too.
I'm glad you say that, because I think sometimes we as band directors feel like it's completely incumbent on us to do everything, when in fact we can be allies in a way where we're helping other people learn about the truth about it.
Well, and what's been helpful in the past few years, there are some forums now. On Facebook, there's Women Rising to the Podium, Women Band Directors National, or Women Band Directors, Band Directors International, WBDI. So people have a place where they can go and they can ask questions freely and get support from other women. And that's really, really important.
So the next question is my favorite question of the entire interview. So I have invented a time machine, and I'm going to whisk you back to the afternoon of your high school graduation. What advice are you going to give?
Wow, I didn't think we were going all the way back to high school.
Oh, we're going all the way back to high school.
Okay. But even back that far, I would tell myself to be more curious. I would, especially about the people who came before us. What were their experiences? and how did they live their lives. And I think specifically about my father, because he had all of those experiences in the military, and I knew that he'd done those jobs, but I didn't really understand what they were. And I wish so much that I had dug into them more deeply. And I did have a chance in the past few years to talk about him. I have all of his archives. So we went through that, and I was able to record him talking about some things. But there was so much in there, and to know what the people whose shoulders we stand on, the things that they've been through and the things that they've done. Frank Battisti, there are many people that don't know who he is, but many people also who don't know where he started and what he went through. Sometimes they think you're at this point, you've done that all your life, but what did you do? And what were their lessons that they learned? So I wish that I had been, and I try to be as curious as I can about other people.
All right. So, Virginia, I don't ask this question to be morbid. I ask this because if I ask your favorite piece, you might give me a different answer. And what I want is the piece that is most meaningful to you, even if it's Mary Had a Little Lamb. What would be the final piece you would want to conduct or perform?
Yeah, I thought about this. I don't know that it's necessarily the most meaningful piece, but it's a piece that I really love and I don't hear very often. And it's the Intermezzo from an original suite by Gordon Jacobs. Are you familiar with that?
I might be. It's been a long time since I've heard the original suite.
Yeah, well, that's part of it. A lot of people don't do the suite anymore, and the whole suite is great. But that middle movement, sometimes I will do on its own, and it's just gorgeous. It's a beautiful melody, beautiful harmonies, beautiful structure, and the typical band sound that I was first introduced to when I was growing up.
All right, Virginia, is there anything coming up that you'd want to share or promote?
No, the only thing that I had thought of was, this research that I'm doing on my husband, because it's a long-term project that I'm working on and very detailed. And I plan to write a book about him and his teaching and everything. I think that it would be very important to be able to share that.
Mm-hmm. And I'd love to see the list of your tips from your dad.
Oh, I'm thinking about, I have an idea with that.
How can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, I have a website, virginiaallen.com, and they can contact me through my contact page, or they can just email me at virginiaallen.com.
Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mark. I've really enjoyed this. It's been a lot of fun tonight.